Good morning. Dr. John Taylor Kent here. We have a lot to talk about. I haven't organized myself very well on this, but I've been working on it for a long time. How long? Longer than most of any of you have been alive. When I was a little boy, my mother used to quite often tell me, stop, start again. And because I would be deep in thought, internalizing the thought, and then in the middle of nowhere, I would start talking out loud. And she was a little bit intrusive. So rather than listen to me, she had to interrogate me. And she wanted me to back up and start the thought over again. So it was a little bit annoying, but at least she was paying attention to me. And of course, it was interrupting a train of thought I had already started and gone quite a ways on. But then another thing happened. And by the way, when we're learning language, we tend to speak it out loud as children and then gradually internalize it so that speech becomes subvocal and the muscles are still working, which can be read, by the way. That's why they can tell what you're thinking, is because they can actually pick up on the finite musculature movement of your mouth, lips, throat, all that. They can measure that, and they can interpret that. They can turn it into language. It sounds kind of bizarre. But the thing is that when we're learning, according to Alexandre Luria, famous Russian psychologist who, I think he got most of his experience in World War I with head injuries. He was one of the fathers of neuropsychology. One of the great ones. He had probably the best insight, the greatest philosophy, the greatest understanding into it. So, you and I as children will babble out loud, we'll start forming sentences, we'll start talking, and it'll go nonstop. And then from going nonstop, we'll start to internalize it. In other words, we won't talk out loud so much. And at the age of about 2, all of us rattle like crazy. It drives our mothers nuts because we have to vocalize everything. I mean, any thought that we have, we verbalize it. And of course, the result is this non-stop flow. And it kind of drives mothers nuts, and they want a little peace and quiet. And also, as you internalize this, you internalize your thought processes. So it's very important that you go through this stage to develop intelligence. And my mother would stop me quite often. And I remember when I was aged about 5, maybe 4, but 5, she would tell me, stop trying to save the world. Stop trying to save the world. Because all I was doing was observing and commenting. Why is it this way? Why are things done this way? It doesn't make sense. To me, the adults appeared nuts. I mean, they're teaching me to do things, and they're thinking and they're expressing things to me one way, and yet I'm observing all this other stuff that's contrary to what they're saying. I know it's a long lead-in. But what I want to get to is restoring our republic. How do we do that? Well, the first thing we have to realize is that we don't have a republic anymore. We've lost that form of government a long time ago. We probably lost that form of government during the Roosevelt era. He screwed us up more than anybody else did. And I know there's all kinds of monuments to the man telling us that what a great president he was and what wonderful things he did. He actually is the guy whereby they set up all these illegal or unconstitutional trusts in the background, surreptitiously, in secret, and enrolled you and I in it as beneficiaries who never get the benefits. So that's what you're living in. You're not living in a free nation. It's not free. You're bonded at birth. You're a doggone bond slave, just like I am. We're bond slaves in this country. We're nowhere near the freest and the greatest nation on the earth. People in the Orient consider us a slave society. They're familiar with this bondage that we're in. It's a mental bondage. So I guess the first thing is realize you got a problem, right? And our problem is that, well, look at how much is going wrong. Why is it going wrong? How come we can't seem to affect any change or forward motion and things can't get better? They only get worse. Well, they only get worse because we don't have a foundation. I know, I go immediately into the Bible like a one-trick pony, and so that's where I'm almost headed with this. However, Thomas Jefferson has to have been probably our best founding father. The man never ceases to amaze me. Statements come up, and he is cited so often, things I'd never heard of before. And I think the gentleman actually prepared for everything. Oh, by the way, Thomas Jefferson was a famous Bible reader too. He has his own Bible. He took out the letters of Paul. He didn't like them. So he put in it the books that he liked. So the Jefferson version of the Bible's got a few less books of the Bible in it. The thing I heard yesterday was about the recovery of the Republic. And prior to that, a friend of mine, a brother of mine, I think he's a few months older, younger, I don't remember, but Russ told me that Jefferson came up with recovering the Republic by isolating ourselves into groups of 100. And he got that idea from Moses, from the Bible, which he kind of abhorred, at least in the form it was given to us at the time. We're told he was a deist. He wasn't a Christian. We're told all kinds of things. And by the way, it was Thomas Jefferson that sent the Marines over to the shores of Tripoli. Why was it? Because the only way we could get those Muslims to stop pirating our ships, killing our men and all that, was to go after them at home, literally in their villages, right where they came from. And by going in there, they decided it wasn't worth it because they realized we were willing to pay the price and sacrifice their blood. So we were willing to go in and enforce the laws by wiping out their families. It's horrible. But that's what our Marines did over there. And that's how we stopped I think it was the Barbary pirates. Anyway, we stopped their pirating by doing that. Supposedly there was a treaty made. When you look carefully at the treaty, it never was an honorable, noble treaty. They gave us their rear end is what they did. Okay. So, first thing is realize you have a problem. And in our case, we have to realize that not only do we not have a democracy anymore, we don't have a republic. And that's the most important part. So, Thomas Jefferson said when the republic was gone, the way to recover the republic was to form groups of 100 men and not let anybody into your group who didn't support the Constitution and the republic. If they didn't support the Constitution, every bit of it, like it was a religious document, if they varied from it all, you kicked them out, you wouldn't let them in. They had to swear fealty, allegiance to the Constitution and abide by the principles. And today, we stopped abiding. Well, we don't abide. We want the other guy to abide. We want to put restrictions on people because they make us feel good. And as a result, we think we're taking away their freedom when in fact we're curtailing our freedom. But we're too ignorant, blind, stupid, and dumb to see past our own nose and realize that next year this is used against us. That next year this wonderful feel-good rule and regulation, this new law that we've created that has no it's not constitutional because there's no crime, nobody's been injured, nobody's been wounded, nobody's been hurt. And we're gonna restrict the other guy from doing stuff, and invariably we restrict ourselves. So Jefferson said you isolate in the pockets of 100 and you establish the Constitution in small enclaves, small groups of men. You didn't let anybody in who didn't agree with you. Now there was a county in Mississippi called Jones. Maybe it was Jonesboro, but I think it was Jones. Jonesboro, Mississippi. You have to look it up. It's a famous rebellion, if you will. It was during the Civil War and after the Civil War. And it was the only county in the southern states that after the war did not suffer harm from the carpetbaggers or from the Yankees. They didn't burn that place. They didn't loot, rape, or pillage. They didn't do any of the horrible things they did throughout the rest of the South. Why? Because the men of Jonesboro decided they weren't going to let the outsiders in. They weren't going to participate with that outside war whatsoever. And they had a defensible perimeter. So they would they let people know, you're not welcome, don't come here. And when they did, they kill them. That was the basic rule, is no outsiders are coming in. There's a war going on out there. We don't want anything to do with those crazy people. Now, there's a few other elements about this guy in Jones County, which I didn't find very palatable. I didn't like some of his practices, but that's another story. But the people from Mississippi are pretty proud of the fact that they held their ground and they kept the rest of us out of there. We have to, according to Jefferson, we have to agree when things get out of hand, and I can't remember the exact quote, we have to agree to roll back the system of government to the original structure our founders gave us. And we're nowhere near there. I'd love to be able to say I don't know where to start, but I think I do know where to start. There's several possible starting points. I love my idea, which I got from Eustace Mullins, of the strategic intervention of the original 13th Amendment. Why? Because it changes the structure of the federal government like that, and it puts us in the proper perspective, the proper order. And when we do that, we can even abide by some of the gifts that George Washington gave us. And then you've got this charter given to the Federal Reserve private banking system, central banking system, monopoly money was given in 1913. 2013's passed. Why is that son of a bitch and behemoth still around? That's the one whereby they control us. That's the president of the country. That central bank is running the show. And these DC puppets are just putting on a shit show for us all to keep us busy and to make us think we're the best, the greatest, and the bravest, and the freest nation on earth. Well, we certainly have the trappings, the trimmings. We certainly have the presentation, and we certainly got the ego. We're narcissistic and self-centered, and we can't see past our noses. We think the world loves us. We think we're great. We don't think we do anything wrong. So much wrong is being done in your name that if you don't correct it, you're partaking, and you're going to be cursed just along with the rest. And that even could include the eagle being burned from one end to the other, while the rest of the world sits back aghast in horror at the results of a nuclear war on our soil. It's a real distinct possibility. And it's pretty probable right now because we've got crazy people in D.C. You've got a crazy woman running the country named Susan Rice. You've got a crazy woman. You've got the Wicked Witch of the West, and that would be Nancy running the show, who started her own insurrection so she could frame Trump with it. There's your insurrectionist. I think she ought to be tried. No release, no bond. Keep her in jail until the jury comes back. Anyway, what I'm getting at is that Eustace Mullins pointed out that the original 13th Amendment was the law of the land, was properly ratified. And he was a Virginia. He was a citizen from Virginia. And he knew that Virginia had ratified it. But we couldn't prove it. He knew that the 9th state out of the 13th of the original 13 states had ratified it. And that was his state, the state of Virginia. But he couldn't prove it. Why? Because when the British raided Washington, D.C. and burned the White House and did all their stuff, they also went into Virginia. And they took the handwritten notes of the Virginia state legislature. Those guys could write back then. You know, cursive, that cute stuff, that fancy handwriting, which we've lost, which actually helps develop intelligence so much that if there's anything children should learn in school, it's cursive handwriting. And they shouldn't be learning it in 3rd grade. They should be starting earlier than that. I know, I'll tell you about my story on that sometime. Eustace Mullins died before there was a major discovery made in Concord, New Hampshire. In the capital of New Hampshire, they were cleaning out the Capitol building. I guess they got into some of the deep recesses of it in the old documents. And they found a copy of the New Hampshire, a copy of the Constitution that they had there. And it had the original 13th Amendment. Nobody knew that New Hampshire had adopted it, had voted on it, had ratified on it. So there's your 10th state. And by the way, those documents for the proving that Virginia had ratified it, had voted it, and it was ratified properly, those are under lock and key to this day in England. I think that's our property. I think I'd go to war over that. I'd serve those son of a bitches up notice and say, you'll return it and it better be in good shape. Because if it's not, you're going to get the big one. We're going to give it to you. I'm tired of the British leading us around by the nose. I'm tired of that queen running the show and owning this nation in the background. Anyway, we need to restore the original structure. And I believe that the original faux pas, the original mistake that threw everything off, and the easiest way, the most clean way to restore a republic is to restore the original 13th Amendment. And if you look that up, you will find it hidden away. And, you know, Google will tell you it was regarding titles of nobility and whatever it was. You know, the titles of nobility. So basically it said that to be what we were told, it was basically you couldn't accept a knighthood from the Queen of England. You couldn't accept a position granted by a foreign power. You couldn't accept a nobility bestowed by a sovereign king or queen. But we allowed it to happen. And by the way, that's not the proper perspective for the original 13th Amendment. The proper perspective and the title for it should be the separation of powers. So you'll find that if you dig for it. And so it maintained the separation of powers and kept us safe. But it was only good for 1 year. And then in the Congress of 1813, March 4th, I believe, they violated, in clear violation of the original 13th Amendment, They sat the attorneys in Congress. Now, I'm really going to belabor this point. I got to sell it to you. You got to buy this one. You got to eat this one up, because this is the pivotal point. This is the pivotal idea from which we get leverage back and get our country back. The reason for the original 13th Amendment was to stop the attorneys because they had gotten us into a war with Great Britain. And that war was the War of 1812. So that amendment was ratified quickly and put into place. And then the Congress in 1813 in March violated it. And by the time Abraham Lincoln came around and became president, he violated it more. Why? Because Lincoln knew that it basically did not permit him to occupy the office of the presidency. He was barred from it by the original 13th Amendment. Actually, he was barred from citizenship in any and all these states by the original 13th Amendment. So, we had what was known as the British Accreditation Registry, BAR. And the Bar Association was beholden to the British, beholden to the Queen, beholden to that corporation in that little enclave known as the City of London, that powerful little city that's actually a separate jurisdiction. And even the Queen has to ask permission before walking into that little mile and a half square town there for the bankers in the middle of London. So it's called the City of London. Sure sounds like it's London, doesn't it? But it's not. It's the City of London. It's that little weird angular city that's got its own jurisdiction, its own walls, it's its own territory. It's a sovereign nation right in there, undermining Great Britain at large. And in there, there's what's called the Crown Corporation. And that is a bunch of attorneys that basically probably started with running tea on the clipper ships. And by the way, that's what they wrote in the history books. Gee, why did they have to race across the seas in the fastest ships made, outrunning everything else, to deliver tea from China? What's the big deal? Why do the people have to have their high tea? Oh, that's right, the Queen's got to have her tea. Folks, they were running opium. They were running dope. They were dope runners. You ever hear of a privateer? It was a nickname given for an American who owned his own ship and was out on the high seas trading freely in whatever he wanted to trade in. And part of that was quite often opium, drugs. So they needed the fast ships to avoid everybody else because their cargo was so precious and so valuable that they had to be able to outrun everybody else. So they were in clipper ships. And I guess those were pretty magnificent, and they hauled ass. The original 13th Amendment, it did bar titles of nobility. You couldn't be a knight. Likewise, you couldn't be an esquire, which is just below a knight. It's like a glorified scribe. And so the original 13th said, basically, this is just from my memory, so I'll get it wrong. Anyone who was a member of the Bar Association was stripped of any and all citizenship in these United States. So in other words, if you were a member of the Bar Association, if you had sworn fealty to this outside entity which was taking us to war and screwing us up and still trying to take us over, you were stripped of all citizenship. I don't know exactly how, technically. I'm not a scholar in the Constitution, but my understanding is that this thing actually maintained the separation of powers, in that if you were a member of the Bar Association, or rather if you were a member, if you were a lawyer, I think the word attorneys wasn't even liked back then, but if you were a lawyer, you had to stay within your branch of government. Basically, lawyers were officers of the court, and as officers of the court, they were members of that branch of government, and they could not cross over. You couldn't take an attorney and elect them to the president, to the executive office. He couldn't be president or vice president. You couldn't take an attorney and elect him to the Senate or to the Congress. They had to stay separate, separation of powers. And in case you're wondering, that idea of three co-equal branches of government is not right. That's a myth. Another myth is that Supreme Court justices are appointed for life. That's a myth as well. Read the Constitution, and you'll see the Supreme Court justice may serve while under good behavior. And the B in behavior is capitalized. And that meant if they were bad in any domain, bad behavior anywhere, it was relevant, and they couldn't sit on the bench. They couldn't serve on the Supreme Court. And as far as I can tell, all of our justices are guilty of bad behavior. Even your favorite and my favorite. All of them are guilty of bad behavior, and they should step down. The Supreme Court is not a co-equal branch of government. It wasn't even intended to have that much power. They were always subservient to the Congress. They had to do the Congress's will in legislation. They couldn't interpret it. They could just make fine matters of discrimination and applying law and making sure that no constitutional principles were violated in its formation or its application. And the presidency wasn't even as powerful as the Congress. When I say Congress, it refers to the combination of Senate and the House of Representatives. The strongest, most powerful body was the Congress, because only the Congress had the authority and the powers to go to war. Without a congressional declaration, be it limited war or unlimited war, you didn't even have a commander-in-chief. Your president was not a commander-in-chief until he was summoned by the Congress to go to war. So he wasn't allowed to do all those little excursions on the outside. He wasn't allowed to have platoons of special forces, really highly skilled men that could be ordered to do virtually anything, and lived and worked off the books. I mean, some of these SEALs and some of these other special forces guys have actually detailed that they were sent on missions inside our nation, and it was only after they had succeeded in their objective did they later realize, by reading the newspapers, that they had murdered a politician, illegal as hell, and they knew they had to keep their mouths shut or they'd be the ones hung out to dry. Yeah, we're a bunch of murderers and thieves in this country. Don't kid yourself. So, you want to restore the Republic? I do too. If we restore the original 13th Amendment, according to Eustace Mullins, the 14th and 15th Amendments should be tried in court, and it should be argued that they are unconstitutional because while they were passed, the South was not represented. The South was not electing their senators and their congressmen. They were being appointed by the military occupiers of the South, by the North. So those are null and void because they were not properly voted upon. The South had no representation. And then as far as the 16th and all the other amendments, those can be challenged because they are out of order. And because they're out of order, they're gone as well. This is Eustace Mullins' idea. I'm not taking it for my own. I got a few ideas in there of my own. There's a fellow named Semper, an attorney who wrote a book called The Fruit of a Poisonous Tree. Or is it The Fruit from a Poisonous Tree? It's a bluish cover paperback, and I don't think they'll sell it on Amazon because it's one of the most important books in the world, especially an important book for Americans. And basically in that he documents and tells you that the 16th Amendment for the direct taxation of income was never ratified. It's not the law of the land. It was never even voted upon. And how it got passed or foisted off on us is there was an acting Secretary of the Treasury. And he and another bureaucrat high up, who was in a position fully ensconced, so he wasn't an acting director, the other bureaucrat, the two of them announced to the world that the 16th Amendment had been ratified, and that appeared in the papers. Who controls the papers? Who controlled the papers back then? And that was it. We were stuck with an income tax. The Founding Fathers never would have allowed it. They would have regarded it as immoral to tax a man of his daily wages, whereby he supports himself and keeps himself from becoming dependent upon the public dole. Now we've gotten that far. So if we do that, that gets rid of most of the structure, all the laws, the case law built on that, all that stuff's gone. So that's peeling it right back to the original root as best I can do. There's a lot of technical things in that. And we also have all of these, what do we call that? We don't even hardly talk about that anymore. We have the cabinet, the president's cabinet, all of these positions, these seats in the cabinet. And we need to get rid of some of those. Those aren't constitutional. Energy. What do we need that for? They just screw the energy up as best they can. Education. What do we need that for? They ruined our children. They ruined our nation. They dumbed the American people down. They should be fired. So basically, we can just roll it back in reverse. Department of Homeland Security doesn't get to the news very much, but the FBI does, and I'll tell you the DHS is just as bad as the DOJ and the FBI. So we can roll these back and pare the government down and bring our expenses down and get our freedom back and stop appointing these men to be directors of, secretaries of these branches under the executive, who've put together these rules and regulations that take our freedom away. They're not helping us anymore. By now you must realize they do more harm than good. They've been doing more harm than good for probably the last century. Now that brings us to that other institution, which is in clear violation of the Constitution. The Constitution specifies what money is, who has the authority to mint it, and it's gold and silver minted. And it limits who can do that. Not just anybody can mint coinage. And there's a great tradition behind that. And so we need to go back to it. Why? Because they can't steal from us then. They can't debase the currency. We actually can hold our wealth and store our wealth, and they can't rob us of our labor by inflating, inflation is just another word for theft, by debasing the currency like they've done now, in which we're probably less than a penny of the value of what the U.S. dollar was worth when they originally started the Federal Reserve note, which is an instrument of debt, not wealth. And because of the debt, we get hauled off into different wars. There were no world wars before the Federal Reserve existed. We need to destroy that Federal Reserve system. I love what Ron Paul said. I think he's got the right idea. I know everybody says audit the Fed. We don't need to audit them. We just need to pass a simple law and have the balls to enforce it. And that is, we tax them at 105% of their profits since the date of their inception. And we recover all of that phony money. And if there's ever any complaint about why the extra 5%, that's because they did their money magic or their fraud on us, insisting that we repay money with interest that didn't even exist. In other words, we were always on the hook to return more money than what was in existence. You see, the system was designed to cause bankruptcies. It was designed to defraud the people. It was designed to steal, rob, to control everything in this nation. And that's what they've done. And I believe most of the stock is held, I think it's all held privately. I don't even think the holders of it can sell it. I think it has to stay within their few families. We need to go back to real wealth, real money, so that we can avoid having to go to these wars, do these wars. They would never have happened if there was not a Federal Reserve. If we had not allowed those bastards into the nation, we would have been better off. As a matter of fact, Jefferson made big warnings, and Benjamin Franklin, he gave us warnings as well and put those warnings in writing, but we didn't heed them. The problem was George Washington made the mistake of liking a certain population and inviting them in here. And that probably was something his Masonry ordered him to do, since those folks appear to be the ones benefiting behind Masonry. In secret, of course, because it's all secret. Listen to John F. Kennedy's speech about secret societies. Within a week, he was dead. I'm glad he made the speech. You may think he was a fool. He got himself killed. Well, the first attempt that we know of was on November 4th, well before that speech. And he knew they were after him. How do we know that he was being targeted? Because he was supposed to go to Chicago and give a speech. And word came through the deep agent undercover, working deeply undercover, that they were going to whack him in Chicago, so he didn't go there. And this brilliant agent, this brilliant patriot, totally dedicated to service of his country, wasn't able to save him by the time it came to Dallas, because by then the bad guys had figured out who he was, and they set him up to be their patsy. There ought to be a full life-size bronze statue of the man who saved the president's life on November 4th and would have saved it again if he could have. And when he got caught up in it, he didn't get caught doing anything. When he got caught up in the trap and they framed him, he knew. And he said publicly, "I'm just the patsy." He was an intelligent man and a young man, and his friend who knew him had been sent to kill him. And the friend who had been sent to kill him had been given a lethal dose of the cancer virus, a weapon they were working on at the time. And he went ahead and did it because he was ordered to do it. And the promise was they'd take care of his family after he passed. And a few weeks later, he passed from his intestinal cancer. So we do away with the Federal Reserve, and we go back to silver coins. Gold is a little bit too precious to be traded daily, and it's heavier than hell, too. So we go back to silver. Silver's got this wonderful property, biological properties. It kills bacteria. You know, it's an antibacterial. So it's going to be good to handle it. It's going to be good to have it in the pocket. Feels different, sounds different than these, whatever you want to call, these counterfeits they foisted off on us. How we make these changes? Now that, I don't know. But we're going to make those changes because these guys that are running the country today are going to destroy it. They're going to reduce this country to the point where we don't have a choice. They're going to force us to fight among ourselves even more. They actually divided us before the Great Depression. And one young, brilliant banker, I think he's about 22 at the age of the Great Depression, he expressed during one of the meetings, one of the board meetings, he expressed that it all could be avoided. He was certain of it. He was confident of it. And they took this young man and they commissioned him. Okay, go off and study it and tell us what to do. Tell us how we can, how we can avoid this Great Depression. And he came back and he told them, well, we can do it by uniting the people. And he had it laid out. He had it figured out, and they listened to him. They gave him a promotion and a raise. And then they sidelined him because they didn't want him doing anything. They didn't want any of this stuff to be done because they, the bankers, were the ones that divided us. And in case you're wondering how they divide us, they have several government agencies that, under the color of law, screw with us all the time. Now, you know who some of them are. We know this Gretchen Whitmer, whatever the hell her name is, up in Michigan, thought so highly of herself that she had to tout that there was a group that tried to kidnap her and they were going to kill her. Bullshit. They were all federal agents with the exception of just a few guys, not even a full handful of guys. And they were all just guys that had been suckered into it. They had been set up. It's been the trial. They beat the charges. And the FBI should be disbanded. Now, I'm involved, wow, I've gone long again, in a belief system, a religious organization, a Bible-reading Christian, Israelite Christian, a biblical Christian, member of the Way, the faith of our fathers. It really shouldn't be any religion called Christianity, but that's a whole other deal. It's technical. Don't get offended at it. We've got to be able to face the fact we were hoodwinked. I want you to realize that the 16th Amendment, the IRS started in the Philippines and they moved it over to Puerto Rico. And the Social Security started as social insurance. And they actually moved you and me to Puerto Rico and to the territories because you couldn't tax a landed citizen that way. It was unconstitutional. So if you get a hold of your master file, you'll find out where your residency is and your occupation. They give that to you in your master file. It's a series of frauds. Very intricate. You've heard of the devil is in the details. We got a lot of homework, a lot of research to do. Now, the main reason why I can declare that there is no republic is that the parties to the Constitution are no longer represented. The parties to the Constitution were the states, and their delegates signed for them on the Constitution. You and I did not sign as citizens, so we're not even parties to it except through our representatives, which don't exist anymore. And those people who were assigned to represent and vote were the senators. And the people who were representing us, once we formed a government, were our senators. They represented the state government. They didn't represent a group of people's constituency. They didn't represent a certain number of people. You know how congressmen to represented population, there's an ideal number for that. They represented the state governments. And they had to vote the way the state government wanted them to vote on legislation, acts, and all that. And as well as appointments as well. And if they failed to vote, then they were fired. They were subject to instant recall. And so the 17th Amendment is unconstitutional because the state governments are no longer represented. So I want you to understand that we have to restore that representation, and then we have to be willing to allow the state legislators from which that senator was voted. In other words, he came directly from the legislators of the state in the state government who were voted to represent the people. They were directly elected to those seats. And then the legislators got together, and they argued and fought among themselves, and they debated, and they argued, and they fought it out, and they elected from themselves 2 representatives to go represent the state government who would go to D.C. and they were subject to instant recall. Well, the problem is that congressmen weren't getting paid, and they wanted to be professional politicians. They wanted to get a salary. And senators were short-lived, because if they didn't abide by the will of the state, they were fired, they were gone. So they wanted to be able to be permanent professionals as well. So the Senate and the Congress made a deal. And the deal was, hey, if you give me pay and benefits, I'll give you your direct election so you can stay in office in perpetuum, forever. You can just keep getting reelected and you can stay in office. You don't even have to worry about that big bad state government firing you like should have been done to John McCain several times. And a lot of other senators should have been fired. They wouldn't have been senators for long if we'd have kept the original structure. And our government would have been preserved. It wouldn't have been cut up, and we wouldn't have been sold into the slavery we're in today. We wouldn't have been sold into bondage. But they screwed us up pretty badly in the last century. Until we send these errant senators home and demand of the states, send us constitutional senators from among your state legislators, they're not going to be represented. I think we need to take it a step further. I think we need to tell the state and the governor, you'll sign their paychecks. You'll pay them. You're responsible for their pay and benefits. You pay them what you deem they need to have. And then at least the senator can know who they're beholding to, who they're representing, and they can act like statesmen. They can act more honorably and nobly, knowing darn well that they're going to be consequated for bad behaviors. They're going to be fired. They're going to be recalled home, and they will be forced to finish out the seat to which they had been elected by the people, and that's it. They're gone. Now, Congress was given a per diem. That's the original way it was. And the per diem was for room and board, cover their expenses for the day, so they could go to D.C., and they could pay for lodging, stay at a hotel, and they'd get three hots and a cot. And per diems were fixed. I think we do the same thing. We take away the pay and the benefits for congressmen and congresswomen. No one in Congress gets paid. There's no benefits, none. No retirement, no medical, no vacation time. Why? Because they weren't expected to stay there for life. They didn't need term limits back then. Because when a congressman couldn't afford to support themselves and volunteer, give their time to their nation and serve their nation, they went home, went back to work, and supported themselves. We need to go to that again. However, I think we need to modify it. I think we need to tell them straight out. Per diem is paid for full day served, not partial day. Per diem is paid for no votes missed. You miss a vote, you don't get your per diem for the day. You're not allowed to vote. Maybe we should go as far as not allowed to vote present, to abstain. They have to actually vote. That's one of those things I'd love to see real statesmen debate about. Or historians can go back in the records and see what is there, by text informed by history. That's what we should be doing, because we have to return to our original structure. We don't have a choice. It's the only way we'll be able to be free, to be ourselves, and to be able to get along. Because they have split us up so much and divided us with their identity politics, and divided us with their racial stuff, divided us with their gender stuff. None of those laws built upon that stuff for equal opportunity or equal outcomes. None of that's constitutional, by the way. That all needs to go by the wayside. You'll say they won't be protected. Well, yes, they'll be better protected, because right now there's systemic racism in my nation. And that systemic racism is systemic discrimination against gender as well. The discrimination is against men. a woman can commit murder and get away with it. I heard that when I was a child, when I was in high school. And sure as hell they did. The average man for murder got more than 20 years or executed. And the average woman at the time I was a kid was only getting 7 years for murder. We have to have equal justice. We've got all kinds of things screwed up on that. You want your freedom. You're going to have to take it. You have to seize it. We have to disassemble this government. I love people taking the school boards back. We shouldn't have public indoctrination, public education. They ruin our children. They ruin our creativity. We need to go back to education the way it was before World War II, before World War I. We need to go back to the old ways on that. We produced superior men and women because of our education system the way it was. But by this centralized education system with the communists running the show, with the main goal of our public education to dumb down the people so that they'll just pay their taxes and be good little slaves and consumers, we need to get rid of that. There's so much more I want to tell you. This is about the longest I think I've ever gone, and I apologize. If you stayed this far, I really appreciate it. Do me a favor, give me a thumbs up. If you don't like it, give me a thumbs down. My understanding is that all of that bumps up the algorithm, so that'll help me too. You got some feedback, comments? Please leave comments. And I know the number one comment I'll get is, it's impossible. They'll never do it. They'll never change. Well, it's because we're so corrupt. But as this thing is actually destroyed, as people are dying around you, around us, as we lose more people, we'll wake up. As we sink deeper into poverty, we'll wake up. As we cannot get, there's nothing on the shelves in the stores, and we can't buy seeds and plant them because the governor won't let us do that in Michigan. As these things come about so that they destroy us, which is what they want to do, they're hell-bent on destroying us, then we will realize we have no choice, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Our founders did it for us. We just have to sit on our butts, read those books. Oh, by the way, did you know that the British were complaining about how they couldn't take us over in the courts because the colonists and the Americans read the law books. The number one selling books in the nation were law books, and we all read the law books, and we walked into court on our own, and we held our own ground, and we didn't have somebody who was throwing us under the bus pretending like they were looking out for our best interests. We actually took care of it ourselves, and we couldn't be fooled and hoodwinked. Yes, one has to be that vigilant. And by the way, you and I are benefactors of these huge trusts. There's so much money held in trust on account, so much money of account held on every one of us that you would absolutely shit bricks. I mean, we're talking big bucks. But you and I never get to access that. Instead, these bigwigs and these governments get to, and even the insurance companies, get to submit bills into your trust account and take the real wealth from you. I want you to subscribe to my channel if you can. Speed my videos up if necessary. I think I talk too slowly for myself. I listen to my videos and I like myself a little bit more. I've had a pretty damn abusive background, so it was difficult for me to like myself. I was always kind of browbeat and always told to think of others' interests ahead of my own. So I'm not a very assertive man. I'm not I'm not a strong leader. I know that. I learned all of this summer, late in life. Handling my dog requires me to come up to speed that I've never been at before. Understanding my family shocked the hell out of me. My family is so small. And I do want to tell you about my family because they've had major roles in history. Kents aren't talked about much, but we really did some major things. And we did some things that at the start of this nation that were just absolutely phenomenal. And you're not going to believe it when you hear it. You're going to go, wow, we really had it made. Yes, we did. And then we were invaded, and we let the foreigner in, and they took us over. And right now they have a chokehold on America. They have a stranglehold on us. They got us by our gonads and by our throats, by the hairs on our head. Yeah, right. Oh, man. I bumped my head against the cabinet. Oh, shoot. I left the cabinet doors open and I hit it in the dark. Well, it's quiet right now. The fan is set at a lower speed so it would be quieter. I don't have to run the air conditioning. The heat is broken, the earliest ever. This is phenomenal. Early winters in most places. I have got a blog up, givingpsychologyaway.com. If you go look at that, you'll see some phenomenal things. I have 2 blogs that filled up, and I archived them, and I don't maintain those. You can go and do some research there, like the nature of medicine, the history, and why we got stuck with poisons for medication rather than for supplements, for stuff that was good and healthy for us. I've also got an article up that's embedded in there in which I cited an Indian physician who did the research, and the conclusions were that abortion causes breast cancer. And we had the stats. He had the stats. So I cited him, and I put the stats up. Late-term abortion increases the risk of breast cancer by close to 100%. In other words, the Creator designed your body, mother, so that if you're willing to kill your child, your body will kill you. It's just one of the feedback systems in the human body. And if you don't want to die from breast cancer because you've had an abortion, I've already published this, already put this tip out there. My hunch, and I don't like doing this because as far as I'm concerned, you're murderers. Sorry, that's just the way it is. You murdered your child. Might have murdered my child. I don't know if one of my children was been aborted. I've heard some wild stories from former girlfriends that just stymie me because things happened so long ago that I didn't know about. I'm slow, folks. I'm even retarded, but I get there. Eventually, I understand it. This is late in life, and here I am just waking up to the weaknesses in my own character, the problems in my own family. And I had a rough time because we repress these memories to reduce our anxiety. We use defense mechanisms to reduce our anxiety so we can get by. Because if we remembered some of these insults that happened to us, we might do something that would be totally out of character for us. We might actually hurt somebody really bad. So if you've got your boundaries violated, if you've been a victim, I say pick a new street, a new road to go down, because you've been down that road before. There's a big pothole in it. There's a big hole in it. And no matter what I do, no matter how I try, I always fall in the hole. So you got to pick a new road to go down. In this case, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just have to go down a road we really haven't been through. We haven't been on the road as a republic in more than a century. It's an exciting time, folks. But we have to throw these fraudsters and criminals out. We absolutely have to throw the devils and the devil's children out. It's the same battle, folks. Go look at my other channel, Awakening Israel. Thank you for spending this hour with me this morning. Wait till you get my bill. Yahweh bless.